In Bleach's Cour 3, we were given what may very well be the single most important name in the entire series, the name of the Soul King. In a narrative where names hold immense power, foreshadowing everything from the cyclical nature of the curse that underpins the universe's order to generational conflicts and fates, it follows that the name of a being whose existence permeates through all stands at the pinnacle. The Soul King's name is Adonais, derived from Adonai, which in Jewish and Christian context strictly refers to God as the ultimate uncreated creator. In Jewish tradition, Adonai is often used to avoid saying YHWH out loud, denoting humility and submission to an all-knowing benevolent deity. However, in Bleach, the modification of Adonai to Adonais suggests something deeper, drawing from Gnostic traditions where a demiurge, or a false god, a flawed creator, stands in contrast to the true, unknowable divine. Adonais becomes a symbol of the Soul King, a being tied to creation but tragically flawed in the universe's inherent imperfection. So that begs the question, who were the Gnostics? The Gnostics believed in a higher knowledge, one that transcends material reality. They spoke of divine beings often at odds with each other in a complex cosmology. At the heart of this was the invisible spirit, an ineffable entity without creator or beginning, incomprehensible even to itself. This spirit gave rise to divine emanations or God's thoughts of itself called aeons. But at the fringes of these aeons lay a cosmic tragedy, Sophia, often referred to as good old wisdom or intellect. As one of the outermost aeons, she created a being in her desire to fully comprehend the incomprehensible invisible spirit in which she was made from. But she did so without consent, and that was her biggest mistake. The result was the birth of the demiurge, TYBW, a misshapen, ignorant being who mistakenly believed himself the invisible spirit and who created an imperfect world modeled after a dim memory of the divine pleroma. This Gnostic myth is crucial in understanding the role of the Soul King, Adonais, in Bleach. His fractured existence, stripped of his organs and limbs, mirrors the idea of a flawed creation, a being who allowed his body to be broken to maintain the balance of the realms. Adonais willingly accepted his fate, confident that it was necessary, foreshadowing the divide between the realms, as a decision motivated by his matchless cosmic foresight. It affirms that, contrary to Yhwach's initial perception of the primordial sea, it was not a paradise, but a sunken universe, as also depicted in the secret book of John, the Apocrypha text. Yhwach, the self-proclaimed son of Adonais, is framed as a false messiah. In the episode's opening sequence, Yhwach, who should be the son of a Soul King, appears visibly older than him, yet reverts into a baby, perhaps reflective of his mindset, after Adonais divides the realms. The tears that ensue at the separation from his father, this visual metaphor is a stark reminder of Yhwach's cursed existence. He emerges from the primordial barren sea into the material world, and hearing the cries of a Quincy, assumes the role of savior. Not that he's prepared to, but has to. Yhwach's story parallels the Gnostic myth of TYBW, who created the material world in ignorance, thinking himself divine, but in actuality far from it. Yhwach is likewise a false god, a being who takes up the mantle of the true divine, Adonai, yet continually falls short. His devolution is a metaphor for the plague that is his childlike mind, which contrasts with his adult body. He had outgrown the world but refused to move on, which is reflected in his unexpectedly, in hindsight, quite rash personality. He was supposed to be an all-loving god, yet was unforgiving and ruthless with his soldiers, haphazard eradicating hollows, paying no mind to the state of a balance at the beginning of the Blood War. Had Mayuri not taken things into his own hands, it is almost certain that the world would have entered a state he hadn't prepared for. Yhwach is meant to be a being who seeks only a path to peace, but as we learn from Aizen, ridding the world of life and death would not create a reality of harmony, but instead one where man loses the ability to continue facing their fears, forgetting the value of standing shoulder to shoulder with courage in the face of adversity. This idea is reinforced through Yhwach's power to bestow fragments of his soul upon the Quincy, bestowing the weak with power, healing them from sickness, but simultaneously sentencing them to eventual death, which is a dark mirror of divine salvation. Every soul he saves is cursed to die so that their power may return to Yhwach, who in turn regains his strength, but is doomed to revert to a childlike form if he ceases absorbing. This cycle of absorption and regression represents his inability to escape the flaws of creation. Rather than to stand at the face of fear, he seeks to eradicate it. And the irony of the story is that Yhwach blames Adonais for abandoning him, but in reality it was his own complacency that trapped him in a loop, a prison that is imperfection. Much like TYBW, he was unaware of the greater divine plan. Similarly, the two did not choose to come into existence, but were instead a byproduct of the curiosity of a greater being. The comparisons do not end there. Despite his claims of omnipotence and omniscience, Yhwach's inability to see his father's vision, the ultimate future, underscores his limitations as a false messiah. This leads me to my favorite connection and proof of Kubo's skill as a writer. Mayuri Kurotsuchi is a name whose etymological roots are deeply connected to sand and the death of Buddha. Mayuri is connected to a divine being and accepts the life and death process of existence. He represents a unique perspective on Gnosticism within Bleach, embodying the archetype of the Gnostic seeker, introduced as a sinister figure responsible for atrocities against the Quincy. Mayuri's insatiable curiosity drives him to seek greater knowledge, much like Sophia in her quest for understanding. He almost mirrors her, or wisdom, in that he will stop at nothing to acquire greater knowledge about the world. And not a soul was surprised that he had already known of the secret of the Soul King, something hidden presumably even to Yamamoto, despite never ever having been to the royal palace. His pursuit of knowledge and truth, his relentless drive to evolve beyond his limitations, which has even been supported by statements of limitless, infinite evolution, being feared by the average man and consequently thrown into the maggot's nest as a result, place him at the heart of Bleach's Gnostic themes. Many people don't know this, but the stretch of chapters where captains invade Wegomundo to rescue Shinigami foreshadows not only the nature of the Soul King's existence, but also the truth behind his conflict with Yhwach. In chapter 306 titled Not perfecto is good, by using katakana to form the English phrase not perfect is good, Kubo plays on the concept of perfection. Japanese writers are able to use a really interesting tool, which is the sokuon or chisaitsu, and what this does is create a small break or glottal stop in a word, which when transcribed into English doubles the start of the first letter of a following character. For example, the region in Japan known as Hokkaido has a small tsu after ho, which when transcribed into English will have two K's because the following hiragana character ka starts off with a K, resulting in the spelling Hokkaido. So two K's, Hokkaido. Kubo uses this with fudo, which is the katakana form of the English word good. The small tsu here creates an unvoiced sound, which is then represented as a small o, so that the phrase can be read such that 3 of the 4 letters, the God in good, is apparent. The lack of perfection being the good in God is deeply connected to Mayuri and Suzayo's conversation about whether or not perfection is really for the best. The Club Outside also confirms that Kubo did the English for these Japanese chapter covers, and in addition, the cover reaffirms this. Before diving into the specifics of their conversation, it's crucial to recall that by the final cover of their fight, titled Higher Than the Moon, where of course we see Mayuri, Zumari had already discussed the natural hierarchy, with the sun standing above the moon. Why is this detail important? Well, in Gnostic cosmology, TYBW, Lord Creator, fashioned the archons to govern the material world and keep people within the cycle of life and death. And the highest among them was the Sun Archon, so the biggest advocate for the way the world is, someone who accepts the world as being inherently imperfect, which is Mayuri. This insight adds significant weight to the thematic undertones of the battle between Saizalaparo Grants and Mayuri Kurotsuchi. Throughout this battle, we witness Mayuri's disdain for perfection, while both he and Suzayo take on near-divine personas. In either these chapters or one of Taite Kubo's separate works, both are depicted nailed to a cross, symbolizing the godlike status that they embody during their confrontation, but more importantly, the immense suffering that the divine figures in which they represent subject themselves to when trying to usher humanity into an age of salvation, with their interpretations being completely different. Suzayo's ability, Gabriel, grants him the power of immortality through rebirth, symbolizing a struggle against the eternal cycle of life and death. This theme is central to Bleach's cosmology, and you would be shocked at how closely this aligns with Yhwach's goal, to transcend the fear of life and death by manipulating and consuming others. Thus, he achieves a perfect being. Suzayo's relentless pursuit of perfection, however, ultimately leads to his downfall, revealing that his idea of perfection was far from it. Both Yhwach and Suzayo are cursed to consume for renewal, which perhaps foreshadows that Yhwach's vision would have resulted in something very different from what he imagined. It hints at Yhwach's role as a false messiah, whose supposedly omniscient vision is more limited than he believes. His inability to accept the Soul King's conclusion is mirrored in Mayuri's triumph over Suzayo, suggesting that the Soul King, symbolized by Mayuri, had a far broader understanding of the nature of existence. The average man adores perfection, but what lies beyond is hopelessness. During their battle, Mayuri ultimately defeats Suzayo by injecting him with a superhuman drug that drastically distorts his perception of time, prolonging his death over centuries despite actually being seconds. This transforms Suzayo from someone who adored immortality into someone who begs for death after knowing the truth. What does this tell us about humanity, about the fear of death? He unironically falls back into darkness that the Soul King is confirmed to shield humanity from. Mayuri's declaration that perfection is tantamount to despair captures the Gnostic view that seeking perfection in a flawed world is in the end futile. In the Gnostic tradition, true knowledge brings one closer to the divine, and Mayuri's insight embracing the universe's imperfection and valuing continuous growth embodies this pursuit of knowledge or gnosis. Hence why he's able to succeed in creating Mayuri and is named after the Buddha. The concept that not perfect is good or God reaffirms that the Soul King's decision to divide the realm and to submit to the heinous act of the fearful nobles for whatever reason was justified. Mayuri's appearance in the fight wearing an Egyptian nem or neem, I apologize for my pronunciation, headdress is representative of beings that guided the dead and is yet another reference to his role as the Soul King in this battle of ideology. His later depiction with a ram's head is also significant. The ram's head solidifies his connection to Gnostic imagery, particularly to TYBW's Archon creation, which in Bleach is, of course, by now we've established Adonais. The flawed attempt to recreate the Messiah, not to be confused with Yhwach, who simply takes the Messiah's name and possesses him. TYBW is often depicted as a lion-headed serpent or a ram-headed figure, reinforcing this symbolic connection. We also have, during the second Cour of the Thousand-Year Blood War, the Quincy shadow when Yhwach is summoning the Sternritter, and if you reverse it, it has dark connotations to hell, as well as a reference of Adonais' coffin during the Oshwalen chant, which all stack upon this mountain-high pile of supporting evidence of TYBW creating the Soul King. The Quincy Shinigami War parallels the tension between the material and divine realms in Gnosticism. The Quincy seek to eradicate hollows permanently, which threatens the balance between life and death, just as TYBW's flawed creation disrupts the harmony of the divine pleroma. The Shinigami, in their role of purifying souls rather than destroying them, aim to preserve this balance, yet they too are trapped within a flawed system, mirroring the Gnostic understanding of a flawed material world. Yhwach's vision of a world without the division between life and death, a world of stagnation, is a mirror of TYBW's ignorance. He perceives the primordial sea as peace, unaware that his stagnation leads to decay. His desire to merge the realms is driven by a misunderstanding of creation's purpose, much like TYBW's misguided attempt to replicate the divine world. The Soul King, Adonais, his name shows that he stands as a tragic figure in this cosmology, a being who allowed himself to be broken to maintain order. The value and significance behind the name and role in Bleach hint at a deeper narrative. The Gnostic idea that creation is flawed because it was made by a being who could see all possible futures but was to be sealed in a reflection of cosmic foresight, an understanding that his broken state was necessary to prevent the universe's collapse into chaos. The deeper narrative of Bleach transcends the simple dichotomy of good versus evil. It's not black and white, hence the term Bleach. It is a story rooted in Gnostic cosmology, where flawed creators, cursed saviors, and seekers of hidden knowledge battle against the stagnation of a decaying universe. The names within Bleach, spearheaded by Adonais and followed by Yhwach and Mayuri, carry with them the weight of this cosmology, linking them to a mythic past where the boundaries between life and death, creation and destruction blur. Through the lens of Gnosticism, Bleach's story takes on new meaning. The Soul King's name Adonais ties together the fractured realm, the Quincy's struggle against the Shinigami, and Yhwach's tragic descent into a false messiahhood. Mayuri, the mad scientist, emerges as a Gnostic hero, projecting perfection in favor of endless growth, whilst Suzail's failure underscores the dangers of seeking divine control over a flawed world. Bleach is not just a story of battles and powers, it is a tale of flawed creation, where even the most powerful beings cannot escape the consequences of their choices. Where our protagonist in Ichigo, and him staying true to his soul, can sometimes mean succumbing to a fate that was created for him. This is why he resembles the Soul King and Yhwach, and is also the only person who can take down the Soul King. Can you imagine all of this from a single name? If you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a comment. Let me know if you liked the video. Give me some suggestions. Make sure you drop a like. Follow my socials if you want to see more of my content. Subscribe as well. And remember, we're on the road to 10K. So yeah, as always, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.